Welcome to Verified Fears. Highway patrol officers are trained to handle drunks, accidents, and crime. But nothing prepares you for the moments that break the rules of reality. Tonight, you'll hear what keeps officers awake long after the flashing lights fade. These are 10 disturbing true highway patrol stories that haunt those paid to protect us. Buckle up. Some rides never end. As a senior highway patrol officer, I used to believe that routine was the backbone of safety. The rhythm of my shifts, the familiar stretch of wind-whipped blacktop beneath my tires, was a comfort after the chaos of the city. On that particular autumn night, the road was almost meditative. Empty except for the flash of my high beams, flanked by curtains of mist swirling over faded lane dividers. I didn't realize how quickly routine could become something else. A trap, a mirror, a door. My shift had just begun when I first noticed the car. There was nothing distinctly unusual at first. A shape in my rear view, headlights off, sliding into the lane behind me with silent precision. It matched my speed. I glanced again, expecting to catch a glimpse of a driver, a flash of a badge or a hand. But the windshield shimmered blank, reflecting the midnight fog. Then came the oddest detail. No license plate, front or rear. This wasn't a local. Every vehicle around here sported plates, even if they were rusted or hanging lopsided. I flicked my blinker and changed lanes, watching as the car did the same, perfectly synchronized, neither gaining nor falling back. I radioed dispatch. The line hummed back with static, not the usual crackle, but almost a semic, like a whisper threading through the frequency. I tried again, repeating my badge number. For a moment, I swore I heard my own voice, faint and delayed, then nothing. Curiosity warred with protocol. Was someone toying with me, testing a rookie? But I was alone out here, and the nearest backup was miles away. I slowed to a crawl, hazard lights blinking. The car responded in kind. Trailing so close I could have reached out and touched it. The fog deepened, curling up from the ditch, obscuring the shoulder and swallowing road signs whole. I signaled for the car to pull over. No reaction. I sped up. It matched. I swerved gently. It traced my movements with eerie precision. By this point, my nerves tingled with a dread that had nothing to do with rational fear or highway protocol. There was something wrong with the world, as though the road itself had shifted, a loop in reality. I rolled down my window, breathing in the damp, metallic air, searching for the familiar stench of exhaust or rubber. Instead, everything felt muted, as if someone had pressed cotton into my ears and blurred the edges of my vision. I flashed my spotlight across the car, expecting a face, a flinch. The light slid across the windshield, refracting back into my own eyes. But the vehicle's interior was a blank void. No seats, no driver silhouette, nothing but darkness. I tried my radio again, desperation creeping into my voice. The static shifted, then settled into a low, distorted tone. Highway 33, it whispered. Error. Signal not found. But I wasn't anywhere near Highway 33. My pulse drummed in sync with the idling engine. I reached for my logbook, not sure why, habit maybe, or a compulsion to leave proof that I was here, that I was still real. I scribbled the time. 2:14 a.m. My pen stuttered over the paper as the car fell back, then began to overtake me, inching forward just enough for me to see the gleam of its side mirror. As it passed, the world seemed to tilt. My headlights flickered, painting the fog with ghostly ribbons. The car glided ahead, hugging the right edge of the lane, its taillights winking in and out of existence. The engine sound, if any, was so faint it might have been imagined. Suddenly, the car slammed on its brakes. I reacted by instinct, stomping hard, skidding to a stop barely 20 feet behind it. My heart hammered. For a moment, absolute silence, except for my own breath fogging up the windshield, the distant sound of wind snaking through the stand of skeletal birches lining the highway. The car's rear windows shimmered as if coated with condensation, but shapes began to resolve in the glass. Too quick to catch, flickering, elongated like shadows cast by a dying light. Was it my eyes playing tricks? Or was there someone, or something, in that back seat, pale and stretched and impossibly thin? I unbuckled, stepped out into the blown mist, boots crunching on gravel. "This is Highway Patrol. Step out and identify yourself." My own words sounded alien, hollow, swallowed by fog. The car door never opened. The vehicle remained motionless, engine dead, headlights dark. I approached, hand on holster, badge catching the faint glow of my flashlight. As I neared, the air shifted, colder, denser, like stepping inside a freezer. My breath steamed and curled, coiling against the windshield. Just as I reached out, the car reversed, impossibly fast, but silent as snowfall. It whipped a U-turn and sped back the way we'd come, swallowing itself in the haze. For an instant, my flashlight caught something on the rear seat. A flash of ivory, almost human but wrong, all angles and white eyes. I chased it, my cruiser spinning out as tires hit a patch of wet leaves. The car, by now, was only a distant shadow, vanishing into a fold in the mist where the road curved north. The odor of ozone hung in the air, and the world felt smaller, shrunken, as if I were standing in the eye of an unfinished story. I called dispatch, hands trembling. The line buzzed, disconnected. I thumbed my radio to local ground, hoping another unit would answer. But the only reply was a distant recording of my own voice, repeated with a mechanical echo. "Patrol Unit 421, error. Signal not found." The nightmare continued. I circled back, checking for signs, skid marks, tire tracks, broken glass. Nothing but my own. The guardrail was solid and untouched, despite the impossible direction the car had sped through. There was no sign of impact, no debris. It was as if the vehicle had phased through the physical world, leaving no mark but my confusion and fear. I retraced the night, memory fragmenting. Each detail felt uncertain, as if my recollections might be borrowed from someone else's story. The fog eventually lifted as dawn crept in, turning the highway gold and pink, the chill fading to something more real. But the unease lingered, the fear that I had crossed into a place where rules bent, where logic failed. When I filed my report, I left out the supernatural details. The department wouldn't have believed that the highway could fold over itself, that a car without plates could act as a mirror, a threat, a message. Instead, I focused on protocol. Vehicle described, time, route, attempt to contact dispatch. But that night marks me still. Every time I drive alone in the dark, I double-check my rear view, searching for headlights that might not be there, for reflections that don't belong in this world. Sometimes, late at night, my radio catches a fragment of static that sounds like someone calling my badge number from a place I'd rather not visit. I remind myself that routine is a comfort. But comfort is a lie. The road changes, bends, waits. What I saw that night was not a mistake. It was a warning. There are highways we travel that lead us right back to the beginning, where the only escape is doubt, and the only companion is fear. Every silent stretch of asphalt and every car without plates is a question. Where does the road really end? And what waits when you finally stop driving? Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I'm not sure which world I'm waking up to. All I know is I'm still on patrol, and the car with no plates is still out there, reflecting all the ways reality can fold, freeze, and forget. There's a rhythm to the highway at night, one that only new officers truly notice. The thud of wiper blades, the whisper of rain on steel, the steady, mechanical blink of the dashboard clock, marking each minute and mile slipped behind. That first night on the stretch they called the Endless, I was determined to prove myself. A rookie assigned to Pacific Patrol, late October drizzle slicking the blacktop, no partner, untested nerves tingling in expectation. Every small town had told its own stories about this section, that it looped back on itself, that the signs changed at midnight, that you could drive it for hours and still be minutes from home. I laughed at those old myths as superstition. But sometimes routine slides into repetition, and repetition opens a door. It began with numbers. 3:21 a.m. Glared back from my dashboard with each glance, even as I convinced myself it was just the kind of rookie paranoia that would fade as experience built up. The radio played classic hits, same as always, except the same tune skipped back in after each break, looping with no DJ banter, no news. At first, I was just bored, watching the wipers smear droplets that never seemed to clear. The mile markers, old, chipped, leaning under the weight of decades, scrolled past. Mile 47, then 48. Then, with embarrassing slowness, I realized, mile 47 again. I checked the map, convinced I'd circled back. But the display flickered and froze. Satellites apparently offline, my location refusing to update. Training drilled me to expect confusion in a crisis. But what was the emergency here? A stretch of highway that refused to unspool. I tried to shake off the nerves. The radio static deepened, humming beneath the old pop tune. I reached for my phone. No service. Outside, the rain grew heavier, dimming my view to a tunnel of watery light. I passed a downed deer on the shoulder, a sad, broken thing, twisted just beyond the guardrail, and slowed out of habit, logging its position for later. 20 minutes later, I passed the same deer. Same deformation, same location, same pitiful remnants of an earlier accident that should have already been cleared by other units. My pulse picked up. The map still showed me on Highway 105. Somewhere between two generic crossroads I couldn't remember actually passing. Each time I pressed the radio for backup, the line rang through to a voicemail box, as if the entire force had clocked out or vanished. Dispatches unavailable. Rang the message, perfectly neutral, looping calmly every time I tried. Never a live operator, never static, never even a real recording from our actual system. Around me, the world pressed in. I tried to change lanes, adjust my speed, test the boundaries of whatever reality I felt trapped in. But every move echoed back. Same straightaway, same trees, same glowing lines painted with the same history of thousands of night shifts before me. At some point, my gas gauge stopped dropping, as though fuel weren't necessary anymore, as if nothing would ever change. After an hour, though time itself felt increasingly unreliable, I began to mark my territory in ways familiar to every rookie desperate to anchor herself. I rolled down my window, dropped a neon surveyor's flag, scribbled the time in the damp logbook. Next pass. No flag, no logbook. Road pristine, trees encroaching as if nothing had ever been altered. Dread began to mount. What had started as a prank or a technical glitch now gnawed at me. I forced myself to recall each checkpoint I'd passed, each set of yellow lines, each flicker of light on the horizon. But my memory blurred, repeating not in proper sequence, but in a cycle, details warping or vanishing with each turn around the circuit. It felt like the world had grown small and circular, like a carnival ride set to endless repeat. Out of desperation, I stopped the cruiser and stepped into the biting rain, hoping maybe the outside world remained sensible, a place unaffected by this looping terror. I placed a palm on the cold steel hood, stared up at the shivering stretch of pines, listened to the static-laced hiss of tires spinning in the wet. In the distance, a chirrup of some animal, maybe an owl or a fox, reminded me that something was still alive, still moving. I checked my watch. 3:21 a.m., blinking steadily. But my shift had started hours ago. Inside, my reflection flickered in the glass. For a moment, too brief, despite the terror, I saw a flash of someone else sitting in my seat. A figure with my uniform and hair, but older, with sunken eyes and a sallow expression, gripping the wheel in resignation. I blinked and the image vanished, but the memory did not. Chilled, I got back in and drove onward, mind racing, desperate for connection. I called dispatch one final time. The line picked up instantly this time, not the robotic voicemail, but instead, my own voice, unmistakable, distant, and monotone, murmuring my badge number. I stuttered out, Unit 86, requesting coordinates. I need... The line cut. Rain battered the windows until the world outside blurred completely, isolating me inside a cocoon of glass and confusion. Minutes stretched and contracted. With every mile, I grew more certain that the world had folded in on itself. A Möbius strip of asphalt and memory, each repetition erasing something crucial, each pass weakening my sense of self. Panic built in fits and starts. Feet tingled, heart thrummed its own errant beat. Finally, desperate to break the loop, I parked at an empty checkpoint, a place I recognized only vaguely from earlier, the outline ghostly and indistinct. I stepped into the rain, calling out with a quivering voice. Thunder split the horizon, briefly illuminating the gloom. That's when I saw her, standing beside the cruiser, the double of myself, a distorted version. Expression unreadable, looking age-warped, dark-coated, perfectly still. She didn't react at all to my presence. Instead, she stared past as if focusing on some point in the distance where the world might actually make sense. Terror surged. I backed away, stumbling, trying to avoid the consequences I barely understood. In a flash, everything fell dark, a blackout not of power, but of perception. I lost not only sight, but substance, dissolving into a nothing that felt colder than rain, more permanent than midnight. When I woke, I was still in my car, shift just beginning. Dashboard clock blinked midnight. Rain gone, replaced by the soft patter of wind against my window. My logbook registered only the opening entries. Radio sang a new song, a hit I vaguely recognized from my childhood. Cell service returned. I checked for flags and found none. Everything was normal, except for a faint sense of dissociation, a lingering uncertainty I couldn't shake. Had it been a nightmare, a rookie's hallucination, or something else entirely? My recollections remained fragmented, details intangible, impressions more vivid than facts. Over the following weeks, I returned to highway patrol, each night more mundane than the last. Supervisors marked my completion. Nobody remarked on lost time, on strange entries or technology glitches. My badge number was normal, as far as I could tell. But as the months passed, my memories of looping back, of the encounter with myself, persisted. So vivid I could recall the chilled touch of the rain, the numbness of confusion, the strangeness of the repeating deer, and the frozen clock. I never mentioned it to the other officers. Who would believe that time could bend, that identity could slip, that the highway itself could trap someone in a story of endless return? But sometimes, out on the road, I caught a glimpse of my reflection shifted just slightly. An echo of the other version driving somewhere parallel, always watching, always repeating. It said that the first shift is a test, not just of courage, of patience or skills, but of your sense of reality itself. For me, those tests never ended. I drive each night with a deeper awareness that some highways aren't straight but circular, that some shifts aren't measured in hours but in loops, and that some stories never leave you. Am I still out there somewhere, driving the same stretch? Are we all just repeating ourselves, hoping for a way out that won't ever arrive? I offer this to you, fellow night travelers. Keep your eyes open for the signs that don't line up, the clocks that don't tick, and the versions of yourself that linger just out of view. The rhythm of the highway is a comfort, but sometimes it's a door. And once you open it, you may find that your shift never ends. The bridge ahead was a dark ribbon suspended between two patches of woodland. One side an endless wall of pine, the other a murky floodplain that, at night, seemed to reflect the sky's emptiness back with doubled force. I'd traversed it hundreds of times, always at the same hour and with the same procedural caution, marking the miles, scanning for signs of trouble. As a career state trooper, routine had become more than comfort. It was the armor I wore against the uncertainty the highway threatened to deliver. But even armor fails, especially when the only thing between you and the river is a thin sliver of concrete and the secrets the night keeps from itself. Fog hung low over the water that night, thickening with each passing minute, swirling over the bridge in coils that glistened under my headlights. The patrol started quiet, an inspection required by the recent rains, making sure the guardrails hadn't buckled and the structure hadn't given way to the forces no one really respects until they do. My mind wandered as the CB fizzled, dispatch confirming my solitary route, signing off with a low, tired voice. No backup scheduled until sunrise, no fellow officers on this stretch. There was a feeling of isolation, a kind I'd grown used to, but never truly accepted. The bridge itself was a liminal space. Driving across it, you felt suspended from time and geography. Sounds were swallowed by distance. Even the radio clung to the signal with a ghost's grip. I glanced toward the shadowy water twisting below, seeing nothing but my own beams swept into mist. It was as I passed the halfway mark that a chill decided to settle over my skin. More electric than physical, a static charge prickling the back of my neck. At first, I dismissed it. The bridge, after long rains, sometimes drew in cold drafts, making the interior of the cruiser feel smaller, heavier. But then, in my side mirror, I caught movement, a flicker. I turned my head, expecting perhaps an animal crossing the embankment, a bird disturbed by engine noise, or even the play of fog against glass. But what I saw was neither animal nor the trick of light. It was unmistakably a shape crawling across the slick asphalt, elongated in the mist, arms bending too many times, stretching impossibly long, only visible in the mirror. I snapped my eyes back to the road. Nothing there. Not even the tattered remains of an old tire or a knot of branches thrown by the recent storm. In the mirror, though, it remained. Slow, deliberate, closing the distance to the rear of my cruiser. For the first time in years, my nerves contracted, real fear drumming a warning behind professionalism and pride. I accelerated, headlights streaming out over the railing, every molecule of air in the car charged. Still, the shadow in the mirror seemed unaffected by velocity, adjusting its movement, keeping pace behind me, ever present but only ever glimpsed in steel and glass. My attempts at radio contact failed. Static bled into every channel, the clean lines of civil communication lost beneath a growing undertone of voices. Fragmented, urgent, not the language of the living. All I could do was listen as the shadow in the mirror grew nearer. Now, not just a shape, but the outline of a face. Twisted, mouth impossibly wide, eyes black as the flooded river below. I kept driving. The bridge felt infinite, longer than its construction allowed. The miles stretched with every heartbeat, with every panicked glance into the mirror. Then, without warning, my cruiser's system reset. The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree, warnings and errors cycling in dizzying waves. The speedometer dropped, my engine sputtered, every familiar sign of mechanical distress dovetailing into impossibility. I veered, coaxed every ounce of forward motion from the engine, skidding sideways, but control was slipping. The fog was so thick now that the far side of the bridge had vanished. Only the murky gray remained ahead, pressing in as if to drown me. But my rear view still showed the thing following, its arms snaking along the guardrail, impossibly stretching, drawing toward the trunk of the car. A piercing silence broke the tension for a split second. No tires, no engine, not even the faint hum of air conditioning or power steering. That's when the cruiser, defying all warning, stalled atop the highest point of the bridge. All systems winked out. The only motion was my panicked breath and the growing awareness that something was outside the normal contours of the world. I looked into the rear view, desperate, adrenaline painting every sensor in my body with dread. The darkness behind was absolute. Except for the crawling arms, the broken shadow, the form now hunched at the rear fender. It felt as if the thing was waiting for me to look away, to accept that what I saw was just a trick, just tired eyes misinterpreting the night. That's when the temperature dropped inside the cruiser, so precipitously that I could see my breath forming mist above the dash. The shadow pressed closer. A pressure built in my chest, a need to leave, to escape. But every impulse reminded me that I was suspended above cold water, isolated, unable to rely on my own hands or my own courage. Time splintered. It felt as though I witnessed entire lifetimes of the bridge, glimpses of other cars, phantom patrols stretched out and erased by the centuries, all visible only when I stared directly through the mirror, never when I looked back at the real world. Then, blinding headlights pierced the fog. A fisherman, drawing up the riverbank, his truck crunching gravel, horn blaring 3 times. The sudden intrusion of reality shattered the bridge's spell. The shadow in my rear view receded, slithered away into the vaporous darkness, leaving only a raw absence in the air. The cruiser burst into life, every warning chiming in desperate harmony. But the road, now visible, offered a clear escape. I rolled forward, staring at the fisherman's truck until all sense of the supernatural faded, replaced with the awkwardness of professional gratitude and a near catatonic need for normalcy. I thanked him, barely able to shape words, offering some explanation, breakdown, strange fog, a sense of isolation overtaking the senses that any trooper would test and eventually dismiss. He nodded, told stories of his own, said he'd crossed the river enough times to know that things can be reflected, but never truly seen. I finished the inspection, careful not to overthink each step, hiding trembling hands until the adrenaline died down. But as I crossed the bridge to return, I kept all mirrors pointed away, refusing to tempt whatever geometry of fear governed that space. By morning, the bridge was as mundane as ever. Water shimmered, fog receded, and the world was mapped, measured, rationale once more. My report reflected only the mechanical. A stalled engine, low visibility, no irregularities found. Yet the image remained, burned into my thoughts, a stain upon the fabric of my professionalism. What had followed was more than ghost or hallucination. It was the reflection of a darkness that lives somewhere just outside what we allow ourselves to believe possible. Night after night, I found myself averting the rear view, dreading not what was behind me, but what might emerge if I gave in to curiosity or doubt. Sometimes these roads are safe. Sometimes they are endless repetitions of routine and comfort. The kind you train into your bones so the uncertainty can't slip through. But those bridges, those thresholds, invite admissions that cannot be rationalized. Many officers refuse to speak of the silences that mark their shifts, the images glimpsed in mirrors, the moments when reflection becomes more than visual distortion, when it is the edge of something else trying to find its way in. If I could do anything differently, I might tell myself that safety is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. I might warn myself to never look too long in mirrors when the fog is thick, to accept the intrusion of the impossible not as an enemy, but as a fact of the job. Sometimes I wonder how many of us drive with our mirrors turned away, hoping not to meet the eyes staring back. Sometimes I wonder what I'm not supposed to see. There is a peculiar comfort to routine, especially for those who work the night shifts in the nerve centers of law enforcement. For a dispatcher, the world unfolds through voices. Excited, terrified, professional, broken, each hanging in the air through static and digital compression, each connecting somewhere real and vital at the end of a wire. You learn the language of urgency, the distant soundscapes behind a voice, the scratch of rain against a windshield, a baby's faint cry, the blurred whir of a patrol siren. Over years, your senses refine themselves in the dark, distinguishing real emergencies from misdials, sorting static from distress with the bias of survival. Comfort is what gets you through. That's what I believed before Channel 13 began to speak. The night it happened, I was the only one working dispatch for our rural patrol office. The others had swapped shifts or called in sick. My supervisor promised a quiet night, nothing more than the usual traffic stops and the occasional wildlife incident on the edge of the floodplain. The sky threatened rain, but the air hung thick and static, pushing every sound through the walls and into my domain, the glow of outdated monitors keeping vigil over endless darkness. Midnight passed as always, my fingers navigating through keyboard notes as I logged officers' miles and exchanged small talk with the regular units. The familiar crackle of the console felt like a lullaby, my guard dropping as silence lingered on the main channel. I sipped lukewarm coffee and leaned back, stretching tired legs when a low, broken signal rattled into my headphones. "Test! Test!" It was faint, overlaid with a metallic echo, an old broadcast signature that didn't belong to any modern frequency. I checked my logs, tracing the squelch pattern. The signal had come in on Channel 13. A frequency allocation shuttered in the 1980s, its hardware now just a relic collecting dust in the far corner of the room. I frowned. The ops manual said only one thing. Channel 13, do not use except in case of extreme emergency. No one used it. No one even mentioned it. The transmission buzzed again, and then, As clearly as if spoken beside me, a male voice called out, "Officer down. Need backup. Location, Riverbend Bridge." The badge number he rattled off jolted something in my memory. One of the old-timers, a name whispered in the hallways, gone almost 40 years now. The voice wasn't frantic, but purposeful, clipped as if being recited for the 100th time. I checked the call logs. No one, absolutely no one, was patrolling Riverbend tonight. With a shiver, I toggled over to verify the unit. The system, at first, returned nothing, then glitched. Lines of code cascaded across the screen, freezing all active displays for a moment. Channel 13's indicator began to pulse, amber and urgent, the console vibrating under my hand. I reached out and flipped the microphone switch. "Dispatch to Officer Maxwell. Confirm location. State your status." No answer, only static, droning and deepening until my own voice echoed back in metallic disarray. For a long moment, the entire room seemed to pulse in time with the indicator light. The temperature dropped. The hum of the old HVAC rattled with fresh intensity, a current of cold air skittering under my desk. I called up the old personnel files to distract myself. The badge number wasn't a mistake. Officer Maxwell, a name shaded with legend, killed in the line of duty during a bizarre incident just past Riverbend, long before my time. Some said he disappeared. Some claimed a body was never found. Most dismissed the story as cautionary folklore, the kind agencies pass around to rookies at midnight. But Channel 13 continued to pulse, each time more insistent. I listened, heart thudding, breath misting now in the suddenly frigid air. The voice returned, every few minutes, repeating the same request. A monotone plea for backup, always for a unit long gone, always perfectly enunciated. I tried to call the supervisor. No reply. Phones dead, cell lines jammed. The station's digital clock flickered, losing seconds, but never regaining them. I flipped through the ops manual again, desperate for something, anything, that would explain the persistence of a dead man's voice through decades-old frequencies. The section on Channel 13 was brief and ominous. Reserved for emergencies beyond protocol. Secure all sensitive files. The world shrank to the old radio and the spectral voice. Then the air chilled further. Lights dimming, fluorescent bulbs keening with unnatural resonance. Monitors flickered, system warnings cascading across every display. Signal intrusion detected. System security compromised. At 2:14 a.m., the chair across from me, the one reserved for night shift partners who never showed, slowly depressed, as if someone sat down in it. I heard breathing. Slow, cold, draggy. The kind that accompanies only the worst nightmares or the feverish sleep of the dying. I locked my gaze on the console, refusing to acknowledge the empty air beside me. My hand trembled, reaching for the phone again, daring body memory to break the spell. Voicemail. Static. A tone I'd never heard before. And then, beneath the soft hiss, the unmistakable scent of aftershave drifted through the room, mingling with coffee and old electronics. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to draw measured breaths, to remind myself how many years I'd done this job. How often my skeptical brain had dismissed the stories told by the road-worn and the exhausted. A stack of folders on the edge of the console toppled. Leaning down to retrieve them, I noticed a thick manila file resting atop the pile. One I didn't recall pulling from archives. Officer Maxwell's personnel file, tabs unbroken. I opened it with fingers stiff from cold. Inside, photos paperclipped to documents, all stamped, closed. Date of death, October 18th, 1985. Cause, unconfirmed. Behind me, the breathing deepened, shuddering in time with the pulsing of Channel 13's indicator. On instinct, I pressed record on the desk tape. Riverbend Bridge, officer down. A soft sigh, so close I felt my hair move. The lights snapped back to full power, all at once, as though the world inhaled and finally remembered to release its breath. The chair was empty. The cold had abated, and Channel 13 went dead, indicator winking out for the first time in hours. I sat frozen, listening to the air, the building's ancient bones creaking. My phone buzzed at last. Routine traffic stop, officers safe, nothing unusual. I wanted to tell someone, to share even a fraction of what had just happened, but the words lodged in my throat. Who would believe that the dead could call back on frequencies long abandoned? That voices could hang in the air for decades, waiting for the right pair of ears on the graveyard shift to listen. By sunrise, I convinced myself to file the personnel file back in archives, its edges slightly damp with fingerprint oil. My report for the night? Quiet. Only the usual static. No calls of note. But sometimes, the faintest whisper of Channel 13 curls into the corner of my awareness when the wind crackles just right or the fluorescent lights begin to whine. Sometimes, when the night is especially long, I key in the old frequency, just to make sure no one living is calling for help. And sometimes, if I listen hard enough, the voice of Officer Maxwell is still there, reciting badge numbers in an endless loop, suspended between protocol and the inexplicable. There's comfort in routine, but there's also danger. The danger of believing that you're only listening to the living, that history and memory don't bleed together at the darkest hour, and that some voices don't deserve to be answered. Now, whenever Channel 13 flickers at the edge of hearing, I remember what keeps a dispatcher awake is not the volume of calls, but the ones that come through from nowhere, belonging to no one. Most officers develop rituals before heading out. A flick of the flashlight, a tug at the radio mic, the steady affirmation that doors and windows work as promised. For a K9 unit handler, those habits deepen. Check the leash, recite the dog's commands, double-check the vehicle's locks. On winter nights, such rituals carry the weight of trust. The road is dangerous, but not nearly as intimidating as isolation. The hush of snow, the boundaries of glass and steel, the loyalty of the only living creature brave enough to brave the hunting, whispering dark. It was on such a night that routine became a trap. The air was crisp, the mountains starting their slow self-preservation, snow sweeping over steep passes, while my cruiser rolled down the icy access road. The department had sent me out with Bear, my 4-year-old German shepherd, normally fearless, trained to detect everything from narcotics to human panic. Bear loved the scent of adventure, the give and take between handler and companion. We patrolled mostly for wildlife. Moose wounded by truck collisions, coyote packs waiting for the lull in highway traffic. Everything was quiet. The only sounds the hush of tires on frozen ground and Bear's steady breathing from the back. Still, I kept my senses alert. A leftover from too many strange shifts, too many odd stories swapped over stale donuts and weak midnight coffee. The first sign came not from the world outside, but from Bear himself. His hackles stiffened as we approached a stretch engulfed by snow. The dog's senses often outperformed my own, rooting out threats long before humans could detect them. At first, I thought Bear had caught wind of something hidden in the trees, maybe a wounded animal or a scent left by another patrol. But he didn't whine or bark. His growl was guttural, focused, his head turning to the backseat corner where, in the gloom, there was nothing at all. Then, all at once, every door lock snapped shut. The noise echoed metallic, deliberate, a chain of thwacks in perfect succession. The world seemed to contract. Snow fell harder, a whiteout rushing over the windows. I checked my master switch, thumbed at the panel. Nothing responded. The chill crept inward, not the mild discomfort of winter, but the deep cold of a sealed crypt, dense and pressing from all directions. I reached for my radio, dead static. The display, usually crisp and comforting, buzzed briefly before cutting to blankness, a hard digital reset. Bear's growl sharpened, his claws scraping uselessly on the vinyl seats, his gaze locked on the invisible thing in the darkness. I fought for control, thumping my fist against the glass, calling for Bear to settle, to heal, to focus. But he ignored every command, listening to a language I couldn't hear, reading intentions that didn't match the world I'd trained him for. Through the frost, the outside world faded away. Snow that should have melted against the heated glass collected instead, swirling in patterns, a slow blanket tightening its grip. Time staggered, chopped into uncertain intervals. My own breath started to fog the glass, a sign that the cruiser's climate control wasn't working, or that the boundaries between inside and outside had shifted. Then the handprints appeared. At first, I thought they were tricks of condensation, random smears left by the dog or from previous shifts. But these were unmistakable. Long, boneless impressions pressed against the window, perfectly spaced. 5 on the driver's side, 6 on the rear, boot-shaped slicks on the windshield. Bear yelped, pawing frantically as the prints began to multiply. My mind raced through rational explanations, condensation, stress, even hallucination. But Bear's fear was real, desperate. He hunched shoulders against the panic, barking furiously into a corner of absolute shadow. I shouted for help, for anyone who could hear. For all my years on the force, I'd never been so completely denied the world outside. No radio, no cell, no possibility of escape. The glass was too strong to break with elbows or flashlight. The atmosphere thickened, the windows clouded now on both sides. A soft, phosphorescent glow seeping in from nowhere identifiable. Somewhere outside, the storm intensified. I saw glimpses. White figures in the trees, not animals but abstractions, shapes untied from the laws of nature. All they did was hover, watch, drift with the swirling snow. The handprints multiplied, some pressing inward, some vanishing as soon as they formed, as if the world inside the cruiser had become a mirror for something beyond comprehension. Bear whimpered, then barked again, his eyes wide with a terror I'd never seen, even after years of riots and crime scenes. I called for him to heal again. He ignored me, fixated on a deepening shadow inching closer, his hackles almost completely upright. The pressure mounted in my ears and jaw, a pounding tide that made it impossible to reason, to plan, to act. All at once, the back window started to frost on the inside, thin crystals racing each other across the glass in impossible patterns. A cold so deep, the air shimmered. From the outside, the cruiser would have appeared lost to the world, cocooned by fog and isolation, held hostage by something that wanted only to watch, to confront, to never let go. My hands had started to numb, fingers tingling as circulation slowed. The temperature had dropped so rapidly inside the car that my breath hung weightless with frost. With each passing second, a sense of dread thickened. The handprints traced words I could almost read, shapes I'd seen only in childhood terror. Bear's yelps quieted as he curled into the seat. Desperation took over. I grabbed the emergency glass breaker, a tool meant for quick escapes in flood or fire. I swung hard and watched the side window spiderweb under the force, crystals tumbling as the seal gave way. Cold, unfiltered air rushed in, biting and raw but welcome for its normality. The handprints vanished in a blink. Bear leapt for my lap, all caution flattened by the need to escape the bounds of the car. As soon as the window broke, the world seemed to rearrange itself. Snow returned to falling in peaceful, random patterns. The forest quieted. The handprints gone except for the broken glass still glittering on my seat. My breath returned, heart pounding, senses jangling with adrenaline old and new. I clambered out, clutching Bear, both of us shivering in relief and terror. The cruiser's doors unlocked on their own, the systems revived, heat surging through the cabin as if nothing had happened. But Bear refused to get back inside. He paced and whined, kept his distance, never again willing to test the boundaries between inside and out on that particular patch of road. Every officer keeps scars, memories encoded in ritual, in caution, in new habits born on nights the world broke down. I replaced almost every control and panel in that cruiser, convinced that something physical could lessen the psychic weight. But Bear's behavior never changed. He eyed every vehicle, every bank of frosted glass with suspicion, as if he alone knew the boundaries the rest of us only guessed at. In my report, I kept to protocol. A mechanical failure, a dangerous temperature dip, systems restored after emergency action. But afterward, when the world rewound and the hours passed in dim routine, I kept thinking about the handprints. Not the shapes themselves, but the way they seemed to want something. A recognition, a crossing, an answer to a question I'd never learned to ask. Safety has nothing to do with walls or locks, not really. It's the illusion of control that's most comforting, the idea that rituals mean anything when you're truly alone. Bear's refusal to re-enter the cruiser was proof enough that reality isn't bounded by steel and glass. Sometimes it shrinks, contracts, reforms into truths you cannot escape. The memory of that night will linger longer than any frost, shimmer stronger than any emergency training. I see Bear watching the darkness, always listening, always prepared to announce that what lives outside and what sometimes tries to enter is never truly gone. If you've faced a night when isolation bent the world and something reached across the divide, share your story. The road is wide, but sometimes it locks you in with fear. This is Verified Fears. For every boundary broken, there's a shadow waiting, just beyond, just out of view, just longing to enter. The highway and all its haunted compartments is always listening. Highways change you. Officers grow old in the pocket of routine, patrol, paperwork, the steady build and collapse of seasons. Some retire with the comfort of statistics and closure, others with ghosts they're not allowed to describe. For years, I thought I would fall into the former camp. Neat transitions, clean endings, a lifetime of clear routes and mileage reports. I retired early, convinced I'd made peace with my share of hazards. But peace, it turned out, was a myth. Like the road I keep returning to, the shortcut the locals claim doesn't exist, the one that marks its travelers. They call it Highway 77, not in public documents, not even in the digital maps kept up by the state. Just whispered among those who spend too much time alone behind the wheel. The legend is simple. It's a road some remember only when they need to be somewhere quickly, when getting lost demands getting found, when a closed sign looks more like a poor suggestion than a law. I spent years believing I could trace every curve of my patch. No unmarked roads for me. But after retirement, when nights grew restless, Old stories crept back, and sleep stayed away. I found myself searching. The winding outskirts, vague detours, the feel of a wheel against an unfamiliar blacktop. One winter dusk, the need for answers grew too big to ignore. I set out to trace the last digital ghosts on my GPS, dead coordinates erased by too many updates, but whose memories pulsed with quiet persistence. The light was thinning, a weak gold falling behind the trees, the hush of birds already settled for the night. The air smelled metallic, the way it does just before snow, and the whole world felt poised in anticipation. As soon as I passed the familiar boundaries of the highway, the landscape shifted, the paint faded from the center lines, signage devolved into vague geometric warnings, and the trees drew closer, shadowing everything in green and gray. I followed a stretch that shouldn't exist, the GPS hesitating, blipping, reporting my progress as not found. Mile markers appeared, then vanished, then reappeared out of sequence. I noted them in my logbook, determined to prove whatever revisionist tricks memory might try later. The shoulder was thick with moss. The asphalt was spidered with veins, as if the entire road had become a living thing, camouflaged and breathing. The first incident came quickly. A call box appeared, ancient but humming with live electricity. Its battered shell graffitied with symbols I didn't recognize. I slowed, debating the risk of contacting anyone at all before pressing forward. Hazard lights flashed in the distance, too regular to be random, too deliberate to claim innocence. As the world behind me faded out, the city, my home, my life before, I witnessed a line of cars, headlights glaring, all traveling in the opposite direction, each vanishing the moment their beams flickered by my cruiser. I counted 7, then 3, then none. Each time I glanced back, the count changed, and none ever appeared in my mirrors. I tried recording, snapping quick digital notes. Each time, the device deleted the evidence, malfunctioning and rebooting until I gave in and put it away. At each stop sign, the road signs warped. Letters twisting into nonsense, icons blurred beyond recognition. Then the map updated itself. Each time I looked down, the route altered. Sometimes the road vanished completely. Sometimes it stretched into miles of looping, recursive directions. My GPS replaced Highway 77 with unknown. Later, it erased even that. With each circuit, the light faded and the world felt smaller. The clock on my dash ran wild, skipping minutes, losing hours. Homes appeared on either side of the road, then vanished when I tried to mark them for navigation, their driveways contracting into the forest as if erased by a child's hand. My own sense of orientation grew unreliable. Every 30 seconds, familiar landmarks repeated and then slipped away. I pressed on, mind alert, eyes narrowed to slits, determined to find a point of reference, a destination removable from rumor, from the fog of unresolved stories. Instead, I found myself repeating the same stretch, starting with the ancient call box, passing blinking hazard lights, hitting a curve that doubled back on itself before dropping me exactly where I'd started. Panic and logic warred inside me. My training insisted on order. The world insisted on recursion. I drove slowly, then fast, then parked and waited for a change. Only then did the ghost cars register. Flickerings of headlights, shapes only visible for a moment before vanishing into impossible geometry. They looked familiar. So familiar, I realized with a jolt, they matched vehicles I'd pulled over, patrolled with, seen in distant accidents decades earlier. Reality narrowed. Each loop blurred seconds into hours, my thoughts growing more abstract, my logbook salted with contradictory details. The air thickened, not with fog, but with a humidity that seemed to press words into silence and silence into memory. The car felt smaller. At one point, I struggled to convince myself that I was alone, that the seat beside me wasn't sinking under the weight of an invisible passenger. The infinite loop realization came in a rush. My clock rolled over with no fanfare. The road sign ahead now spinning aimlessly. The world contracted until every signal, every attempt to record or connect or retrace was lost. My finger jabbed at the dash. My phone's camera reset with hopeless regularity. The only way forward, I decided, was to abandon the rules, to drive past the signs no one else admitted existed, to ignore instructions and track only what I could sense. The feeling of asphalt beneath tires, the prickly sensation at the base of my skull, the way time unspooled when I refused to follow directions. Choosing to defy the imaginary limits, I accelerated through the haze, pressing past barriers both physical and mental. At the apex of a sharp curve, my headlights illuminated a drift of snow. I closed my eyes a moment. When I opened them again, the world had changed. The dashboard read a time 2 hours past when I'd started. The radio chirped with familiar traffic, static laced with dawn birdsong. The GPS displayed an address 30 miles north of my home. I had escaped, but not unscathed. Outside, the air was clear. No humidity, no haze, no houses or signs. My cruiser's tires bore the marks of rough detours, yet the logbook refused to record anything more than the opening entry. I turned the device off, pocketed the small proof of my journey, and considered what the highway had taught me. What roads can offer when they're not marked, not meant to be traversed, not real except in the haunted memories of the few who've gone too far. Some officers claim they've never driven Highway 77. Others refuse to admit it exists. But I've seen what can happen when you follow a shortcut that wasn't meant for you. When you let the hunger for answers outpace the safety of routine. Some roads aren't shortcuts. They're traps, recursive loops pulling you toward the center of something unresolvable. If you find yourself on a stretch that doesn't quite align, a detour that isn't on any map, a route erased from memory and reclaimed by myth, remember this. Not all roads can be escaped by following signs. Some demand that you look away from logic, cut your own path, break the loop before it breaks you. I tell my story now in the twilight of a career that tried to resist the supernatural, the inexplicable. I know I wasn't meant to drive that route, and that the world wanted me to forget. But forgetting, it turns out, is just another detour. A longer loop that leaves the liminal places exactly where they always were. If you've traveled Highway 77, you're already changed. Some stretches of road are so silent, so lost to the world, that your mind begins to fill the quiet with anything it can. Ghosts, old regrets, half-remembered nursery rhymes. That's what I told myself as I took up my new patrol assignment. Ex-military and new to the force, I was trained to trust my senses. On most nights, that meant the steady tap of rain on glass, the hum of worn wipers, the deep breaths and sharper focus that came out in the cold. But even discipline and logic have their limits, especially when the darkness carries a voice meant just for you. It was one of those soaking, endless nights where the world seemed to shrink to the cone of your headlights and the blurry bands of marsh grass lining the road. There was no other traffic, no radio chatter, just the soft static of precipitation against the hull of my cruiser. The marshlands of the Northwest are like boundary lands, half water, half earth, and very adept at swallowing mistakes. I was new to their secrets, more accustomed to desert or mountains, where sound carried differently. But on this road, there were no echoing hoofbeats, No animal cries, not even the distant bark of a dog. Only my own engine and the whir in my mind. I was deep in the marsh, midway down a gravel cutoff, when the temperature in the car dropped. It wasn't sudden, but inexorable. Fingers stiffening, fog skating over the windshield. I was focusing on my hands, making sure they didn't shake as I logged my location, when I heard it. A woman's voice, soft and perfectly serene, cutting through the undercurrent of rain. "Pull over, officer." It wasn't a voice from the radio. My unit was switched to an empty channel, nothing but hissing white noise. But the words came again, clearer, as if spoken from the seat just behind me. "Go ahead. Just pull over for a minute." I straightened, scanning the mirrors. Nothing but shadow and the gleaming backs of marsh reeds twining above shallow ditches. My pulse kicked up as I checked the radio again. Dead. My cell had gone dark minutes before. I almost laughed, remembering all the warnings about tiredness, about letting your mind play tricks. Still, I felt the urge to do as the voice asked. The wheel pulled subtly to the right, a coaxing nudge that didn't quite command me, but made resistance feel illogical, unnecessary. I found myself slowing, vision tunneled, heartbeat misplaced somewhere up in my throat. Even at my most exhausted in the military, I'd never felt so outside myself. So suddenly divorced from willpower. Rain thickened, muting the world down to the pings of water against metal. My headlights began to dim. Not all at once, but as if the world itself were taking a slow breath and extinguishing the fire. It wasn't until I fought to keep my eyes open, to focus on the static wipers, that I realized my body was actively betraying me, responding to a lullaby I swore shouldn't have existed. The voice spoke again, warmly reassuring. "It's safer if you stop here. Just a moment, then you can rest." I swallowed, staring at the steering wheel, locking every muscle I could against the strange lethargy working its way up my arms. But the wheel kept veering, the car drifting over the painted line, so close to the shoulder that marsh waters shimmered just outside the glass. That's when I saw them. 2 other patrol cars, headlights off, parked nose deep in the reeds. I'd have missed them in the daylight. But now, ghostly outlines in the torrents, county markings glinting through the rain. I felt a cold certainty that I was only the latest to come here. I willed every ounce of my training into my hands, gripping the wheel tighter, fighting the drowsiness and gentle encouragement of the voice. My mind flashed back to rumor, to warnings at the academy about locals' tales. Places where things call to you, backgrounds where you should never roll down the window, not even to answer a cry for help. I let out a shuddering exhale, forcing myself to murmur out loud, grounding, naming objects. Dashboard, badge, weapon, dog tags, left glove. It helped a little bit. The car jerked further right. My peripheral vision flickered. The world started to brighten as though dawn were arriving, but the digital clock insisted it was barely midnight. The voice grew sharper, almost laughing, as if annoyed by my resistance. "We all need to rest eventually, officer. Don't fight it. It's so much better just to stop." I nearly lost control as the front wheel nudged into the soggy marsh edge, the car stuttering and nearly sliding. The shock jarred something loose inside me, a burst of adrenaline that overrode both logic and fear. I stomped the brake, switching the lights back on full, siren wailing toward the void. The voice withdrew, receding deeper, but I was left with the echo. A density in the cabin, a soft tug at the corners of my sight. Staring out across the night-soaked fields, I saw that one of the parked patrol cars had someone moving inside. A silhouette pressed to the glass, hand raised in slow motion, as if struggling with invisible bonds. My own fingers refused to move at first, glued to the wheel as if glued by static. Rain poured harder. With desperate effort, I managed to open the door, stepping into ankle-deep water that immediately numbed my feet. The world felt incredibly vast. The sky a rolling mass of black. The only light that from my own cruiser and whatever glowed from beneath the surface of the marsh. I avoided looking too closely, afraid of what might surface. Wind pressed the reeds along the shoulder, making whisper patterns that sounded unsettlingly like my name. My focus sharpened. No one should be in those other cruisers. No missing persons, no backup officers out on this forgotten reach. But inside, something was moving. A flicker of eyes. A mouth shaped in silent screaming. I knew, suddenly and with terrible clarity, that I was seeing not colleagues, but warnings. Echoes of those who had failed to resist, who had stopped just long enough for something to take root. The voice began again, softer, but this time outside my head, carried by wind and water. Night is the only honest thing left. Come inside. Just rest. I felt my knees weaken, the urge to step forward almost irresistible. But something, maybe the memory of survival, maybe stubborn pride, held me back long enough to yank open my back door, grab a road flare, and ignite it with trembling hands. For an instant, the world snapped into searing clarity. The shadows in both cruisers recoiled, their faces attesting to the horror of what had stilled them. The voice screamed, not in anger, but in mourning. A chorus of longing from the soaked horizon. Rain doused the flare, but the moment had passed. I slammed back into my car, re-engaged every system, and floored it, tires spinning and sliding as I forced my way back to the paved highway. The voice faded, replaced by a near euphoric silence. My headlights brightened, my vision returned, and the world became ordinary. Mud, marsh, and the smell of hot electronics. At sunrise, I returned with a search crew. There was no sign of the cruisers I'd glimpsed in the storm, no sign of flares, nothing. The marsh stood silent, reeds undisturbed, except for one set of tire tracks that ended abruptly at the edge of the water. No one questioned me. The log said I'd patrolled the main highway all night, never once leaving the mapped world. Since then, I avoid that stretch on rainy nights, listen closely to the voices carried by the wind, and never, ever pull over to a voice that doesn't belong to my own. Sometimes, though, on the edge of sleep, I hear that song. A gentle invitation that promises a peace no living soul could want. If you've ever walked the boundary between logic and longing, if you've ever heard the road ask for a part of yourself, share your story. The marshes, and whatever waits within their watery grasp, are always listening. Ride-alongs have always promised a front-row seat to danger, an immersive education in mundane law and the unpredictable wildness that animates every shift. For civilians, the fantasy is all adrenaline, flashing lights, tense silence, glimpses of the unfiltered world past glass. I was an aspiring journalist on assignment, intent on capturing the midnight pulse of the highway, the weight of a patrol officer's eyes balancing safety against suspicion. My intent was simple: observe, ask questions, and write it all down as a story for someone else to live. But some stories refuse to be observed. You don't write them, they rewrite you. Officer Kendricks agreed to the ride-along on a Tuesday night, the kind of shift that starts with bland optimism and ends with fatigue that leaks through your bones. He was stoic, proud, heavy-set. Years of routine giving him a confidence that bordered on mythic. His patrol car gleamed with a cleanliness that said both, obsessive, and slightly haunted. I took my seat in the back after a brief tour of procedure and protocol, keeping my camera powered down out of respect. We rolled into the night, the world narrowing as headlights barely dented the darkness. I asked Kendricks about fear. He laughed, pushed the conversation back onto the mundane, and told stories about bad weather and good luck rather than criminals or mistakes. My micro-recorder ticked quietly, gathering notes for later. But the only audio was the hum of the engine and the faint whine of CB chatter. We completed 3 stops in the first hour: a flat tire, a loose dog, a confused hitchhiker. No danger yet. My nerves relaxed. Sometimes fear is the absence of anything threatening, the anticipation that breeds its own shadow. It was at the 4th stop, just after midnight, that things shifted. Kendrick spotted a sedan moving erratically, drifting between lines. He decided to run a quick check. Nothing unusual, he said. I watched through rain-streaked glass as he engaged the driver, routine professionalism in every word. The moment lengthened, my breath fogging the window. I tried to focus on the angles for my story, the cliches about seeing justice up close. The driver left with a warning, shaken but grateful. Kendricks got back in and checked his mirror, sighing deeply. It was then I noticed the weight in the seat beside me, the odd downward sag, a pressure where there should have been none. At first, I rationalized. Maybe the seat was old or simply too soft. The foam compressed by years of use. But as the car pulled away, the pressure grew heavier, almost electric in its certainty. My left side tingled, the back seat felt occupied, the faint warmth of a living presence quietly asserting itself. Kendricks didn't comment. He didn't notice, perhaps. He adjusted the climate controls, his fingers steady and bored. The ride continued. As we drove deeper into the rural outskirts, the air in the car grew thick. I began to sweat, my notebook sticky in my palm. Each breath felt multiplied, as if another set of lungs were breathing beside me, as if silent conversation was unfolding in a tongue I could almost but not quite understand. I wanted to speak up. Did you ever have a ride-along go wrong? But nerves froze the question. Outside, the night pressed the world into a single lane. Silence expanded between us. We stopped again for a traffic infraction, and that's when the door inexplicably locked itself, the security system chirping without prompt. Kendricks frowned, tapped his master lock several times, shrugged. Vintage hardware, he joked. But I felt a hand, unseen and cold, brush the edge of my arm. Panic flared, but I swallowed it. Journalists lived for discomfort, for proximity to moments others would flee. After the checkpoint, time warped. I distinctly remember staring at the dash clock. 1:14 a.m., then 2:30, then back again to 1:14. The world spinning through seconds and hours in a way that made no mundane sense. I looked down and saw my camera lens fogged over. I tried to power it up, but each attempt resulted in a blank screen, as though memory itself rebelled against documentation. The pressure beside me built, a density suffusing air and bone. I felt my heart race, syncing with another pulse that wasn't mine. I wanted to ask Kendricks again if he had ever felt watched. But his eyes were fixed ahead, intent on the road, almost as if he knew something was riding along with us. My perspective blurred. The world outside fractured. Headlights warped, trees doubled, colors flickered in the peripheral, as if alternate timelines vied for dominance. Every street sign looked unfamiliar, every mile marker doubled, then vanished. The back seat felt crowded, as though multiple figures shifted and passed through moments I couldn't grasp. The tape recorder picked up faint background murmurs, whispers at the edge of detection. Each time Kendrick stopped, the pressure on the seat increased, then eased as we drove again. It felt as if something was choosing when to be present, as if the act of movement controlled its reality. Suddenly, the cabin temperature dropped. I shivered, teeth chattering, Kendrick's oblivious in his practiced routine. The pressure gathered, then pressed upon my shoulder. A breath, impossibly close, inhumanly slow, tickled the edge of my neck. I jerked, panic ballooning as my notebook fluttered to the floor, pages twisted by a gust of cold air. I reached for my phone to record the sensation. The device lit up with swirling static, digital artifacts moving in chaotic patterns. I snapped photos, hoping to catch some evidence. Each image returned black, frame after frame of absence, a mechanical denial of the scene unfolding. I hid my nerves behind a practiced smile. Is this route ever dangerous? Kendricks finally glanced in the rearview mirror, his expression curious for the first time all night. He seemed to study me, as if expecting an answer to a question he hadn't asked aloud. Sometimes you drive a stretch and feel extra company, he said. Usually it's just nerves, or the weight of the badge. Life has a way of filling empty seats. He sounded unbothered, but the words felt hollow, staged, as if he had recited them often, perhaps to himself when ghosts pressed too hard. My own sense of reality warped. I flashed back through every terrifying story I'd chased as a journalist, clusters of local legends, confessions from officers who never wanted to speak on record, the notion that the back seat of any police vehicle was a liminal space between worlds. Minutes elongated into miles. The pressure became unbearable. I pressed my face to the window, watching the night fracture, the streetlights glitching between yellow and blue as though entire chronologies overlapped. My mind was a cracked lens, moments spiraling in dizzy confusion. I recorded a note, voice shaking. If something rides with you in silence, does it take you with it, or does it leave you changed? That answer came quickly. Kendricks pulled onto a well-lit avenue, the pressure in the seat dissipating in the sudden wash of safety. I caught my breath, rubbing the spot that felt bruised by nothing. As we neared the station, my camera rebooted, but the video was blank, the memory unrecoverable. When we parked, Kendricks opened the back door for me. The pressure on the seat vanished at once, the chill replaced by residual warmth. I staggered out, feeling lighter, unburdened in a way I couldn't name. He said nothing, just nodded, offered me his card, said I could call if I had questions about the night. I wanted to challenge him on the strange experience, but decided against it. Later, as I reviewed my notes and footage, I found pockets of missing time, scratches in audio, unsaved photos. Every memory of those hours felt both vivid and incomplete. Detail saturated, evidence erased. My article never materialized. The story was absorbed by something impossible, shared not with an audience, but with whatever waits in the spaces between seats and stories. Some rides never leave you. Sometimes, the passengers that enter aren't supposed to exist. That back seat still anchors my nightmares, its shape, its pressure, the knowledge that some realities overlap for just an hour or two. Only long enough to change you and slip away. There's a loneliness in the dawn most people mistake for peace. A silence that vibrates at the edge of old forests, mixing possibility with exhaustion. I've spent decades as a patrol officer, witnessing that twilight space where the world goes still, where pine needles refract sunlight and wrap you in the illusion of safety. The Pine Barrens, far outside city limits, always felt more haunted than comforting, especially after the big fires cleared swathes of ancient trees, leaving behind twisted memories and unmarked scars. My last graveyard shift brought me there not by choice, but by command. Respond to Beacon 41. The problem? Beacon 41 didn't officially exist anymore. Radio protocol is clear. Patrol units check their channels before clocking out, verify frequencies, confirm beacons. Beacon 41 had been retired for longer than I'd had my badge. The official logs marked its location as inaccessible. The fixture supposedly dismantled after the wildfires a decade before. But at 4 a.m., in the static between our shift handover, it sounded off like a fire alarm. A blare that split the radio's quiet, steady, and mechanical as a heartbeat. At first, dispatch shrugged. Must be a glitch, old equipment reactivating. But the tone carried a cadence more insistent, as if calling for help with purpose, not error. I was tired, my mind fogged by overnights and weak coffee. But the command to investigate came down from the top. I drove deeper into the forest than usual, moving off the main highway onto narrowing dirt tracks still scarred by ash and regrowth. The sunlight, faint and half-hearted, didn't quite reach the ground. Shadows lengthened, the air sharp with the memory of loss. Beacon 41's signal pulsed every hour, perfectly timed. 4 notes, a 10-second silence, then again. My GPS couldn't trace the source, marking my position as unknown and spinning slowly in place, as though doubting reality. I tried to reassure myself. Maybe the wiring was accidentally powered by a vagrant current, maybe a prank. But each burst on the radio grew more urgent, punctuated by a low hum that resonated in my bones. The forest looped strangely. Paths I'd known for years reorganized themselves, roads closed off by fallen trees that looked suddenly new, vivid green and untouched by fire. I left markers at intersections, pink tape tied to branches. But every loop took me back to the same glade. A clearing filled with pale ash. 4 charred patrol cars rusting side by side, relics from the night of the big fire. My heart thudded. An old childhood fear returning, dredged up from campfire tales about places refusing to stay gone. The beacon grew louder the closer I approached the clearing. But physical sight of the device eluded me. The signal played tricks, jumping from left to right, sounding closer, then further, leading me through an endless maze of trunks and fallen needles. My radio crackled with my own badge number, rewritten as if being broadcast from another era. Then, the signal cut out entirely. The world grew so quiet it felt staged, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. I stepped from my cruiser, boots crunching on brittle pine cones, searching the clearing for signs of movement or explanation. All 4 destroyed patrol cars bore different unit numbers, their hoods deformed by heat but strangely familiar. Echoes of vehicles I'd encountered as a rookie, long before. I neared the oldest of them, found an officer's cap sealed beneath glass, initials faded. My stomach knotted as I realized none of these cars, or their fates, appeared in official records. History had been abandoned, scrubbed from memory. My flashlight flickered. The beacon, long silent, restarted. Much closer, impossibly nearby. The notes drilled through air, heavy with anticipation. My mind splintered, torn between rationality and the mounting fear that I'd looped into a section of the forest meant to be forgotten. Each step circled back to the ruined badge, each attempt to call dispatch erased by waves of static. The sun refused to climb. My flares didn't last long. Each one burned in flashes, then vanished beneath a weightless wind that swept the clearing, carrying with it the whisper of radio voices from decades before. I tried to focus, recalling training. Always keep your orientation, always make note of sounds, never lose sight of ground truth. But truth itself felt slippery, memory stitched together by echoes of place and time, not by facts. At some point, my anxiety evolved to inevitability. Every approach to the beacon's origin generated no device, just signal, sound, and then the impression of direction lost. I spun in circles, guided by a compass that rotated blindly, refusing to obey north. I imagined what it would be like to remain stuck, to become one more ghost vehicle in the glade, one more badge gone silent. The missing officers, their caps and burned archives, felt less tragic and more foreboding, as if warning me that the forest collects those it cannot release. Then, between two gnarled trunks, I saw something that stopped me cold. My own cruiser, gleaming and new, parked as though untouched by weather or time. But its license number wasn't current. Older, matching the first car I'd ever driven as a patrol rookie. Its tires bore fresh mud, its glass uncracked, interior lights softly blinking. My own self must have circled here years ago, or in another sequence entirely. The beacon pulsed grow louder. Now it was coming from inside the vehicle, impossibly. Looking inside, I saw only darkness, but smudges marked the windows, handprints indisputable in their urgency. I reached for the door handle, and memory splintered further. Loops upon loops, flashes of previous shifts and accidents. Moments both tragic and mundane merged and blurred inside the foggy interior. I staggered backward, instincts kicking in. I fumbled for my phone, snapping a photo that returned only static and light spills, as if the technology refused to obey. The beacon pulsed one last time, thunder echoing it with a spectral nod. Just as panic threatened to trap me, daylight finally broke through. Streams of gold slashing through the pine canopy, changing the tone and density of the air. My compass reawakened. GPS recalibrated. The world returned to color. I retreated to my real cruiser, finding it parked miles from that haunted clearing and missing several hours of the night. My badge number buzzed faintly on the radio, then the channel reset. I drove back to the station, mind swirling. The official report said only, responded to radio anomaly. Signal lost at dawn. The story didn't end, though. It became an artifact in my chest, an ache that reminded me some places never recover from old wounds, and some ghosts are written into the very bark and bone of the forest. If you ever respond to a signal in the Pine Barrens, remember, not every call comes from the living, and not every beacon wants to be found. Sometimes, what you find is an echo, a warning, a handprint on the glass, a memory you didn't know belonged to you. Some bridges are busy only with silence. I spent years as a highway engineer, trusted with the safety of thousands, circling the colossal veins that span rivers, forests, whole towns so small you'd miss them between gas stations. And yet, in all that endless traffic and calculated routine, one structure lived rent-free in my mind, Overpass 14. It cuts over a rarely used section of freeway, all concrete bulk and sparse guardrails, more often host to wind than wheels. If the state had its way, the bridge would collapse back into the dirt, quietly unremarkable. But you can't always redesign a place out of memory. The first time I noticed him was in the early hours of a maintenance audit. The night crew had phoned in some dodgy readings from our new vibration sensors, a sequence of unexplained pings logging between 2:10 and 2:16 every morning. Motion signatures that couldn't be accounted for by passing cars or wildlife. My job was not to believe stories. My job was to find cracks, measure sag, and wave off the fears of crews who saw things in the shadows. But data doesn't lie, and the logs showed a daily anomaly timed as precisely as an atomic clock. That morning, the mist was stubborn, rolling off the wetlands and slowing the sun's progress. My notebook was zipped under my arm. My breath fogged the air. Still, I respected the routine. Walking the span on foot, tapping the rails, checking joints. Halfway across, at 2:14 exactly, I felt a ripple in the deck. Not seismic, not wind. It was the hush an enormous crowd might generate only by agreeing together to hold its breath. That's when I saw him. At the exact center of Overpass 14, framed in a gap between pale lights, stood a silhouette. Neither tall nor short, no engineer's vest or work boots, just a shape, solitary and slick with dew. My first instinct was embarrassment. Had a crewman beaten me here, pranking the new assignment? I called out, and the figure didn't turn. I advanced. The closer I got, the more the air tightened, as if running downhill even though my feet said the deck was level. Another step, and he was gone. Dissolved between the seconds it took for my eyes to blink, leaving behind nothing but disturbed air and the faint echo of a footstep. My radio crackled, but there was only static. Every night afterward, sensors repeated their warning, a concentrated pulse of movement at the bridge's heart, always clearing by the shift change. I reviewed tapes, rechecked alignment, convinced myself it was a bird or the wind, never quite ready to admit the pattern. By the third week, I'd started coming earlier, daring the bridge to offer a human explanation. But each time, the figure was there, always dead center, face never visible, posture that was neither waiting nor resting. The bridge itself seemed to resist being watched, the deck flexing minutely underfoot, sensor logs corrupting upon download. At dawn, the tapes were blank, the data wiped. The only effect was a slow unease, an ache in the spine long after I left. Crew members grew superstitious, swapping shifts or requesting other assignments. They whispered about it. The Watcher. Some described him as a relic, an accident victim refusing to relinquish his territory, or a guardian whose true purpose was best left unsaid. Others cut cables and faked readings rather than linger on the bridge after midnight. I filed reports that minimized the stories. No need to explain a payroll jump caused by midnight dread. My skepticism finally fractured on a rainy Thursday. Alone, I spent the night on the bridge, refusing to leave until the hour passed. As droplets echoed off the rails, my equipment pinged 2:14. Sensors waking with a strange, synchronized chirp, the same phenomenon that had started it all. I saw the Watcher again. But this time, when I blinked, instead of vanishing, he seemed to split, appearing not just before but behind me as well. I spun, unsettled. Logic told me it was a trick of fog, the stress of wakefulness. But the bridge rumbled in answer, a soft vibration through concrete, as if tolerating my presence rather than welcoming it. Fear makes you hyper-aware. My own senses screamed at me to leave. But something compelled me to stay, to force this nightly ritual to a resolution. If I could witness the phenomenon from both directions at once, perhaps I could end it, or at least understand it. I pulled out my tablet, cycled through sensor logs, but all I saw was an endless string of zeros and unreadable symbols. Even the cloud backups failed, as if the bridge's center point devoured evidence the way fog devours headlights. The rain eased. The silence pressed in. In the end, fatigue won. I settled at the edge of the center line, watching dawn chase away the darkness. In the early sunlight, Everything looked harmless. My anxiety felt foolish, an engineer in her imagination, outwitted by a stretch of cement and a persistent legend. As I packed up, I realized something small but chilling. My favorite mug, left at the start of the bridge, had moved 2 feet, now perched precariously at the exact midpoint, a spot I knew I hadn't touched. No one would admit to shifting it. And from that morning on, my badge never scanned at the entrance to Overpass 14, as if official record of my presence had been erased. Officials chalked up the sensor failures to humidity, old wiring, user error, anything but the obvious. But the crews rotated faster. People stopped volunteering for the overpass shift outright. Eventually, it was designated unmanned overnight, pending future upgrade. The watcher, it seemed, had outlasted bureaucracy and disbelief. After I left the department, I'd occasionally drive back by Overpass 14 late at night, watching from the safety of my own car. Every time, the mist would roll, lights would flicker, and, for a breathless instant, I'd see him, the same dark figure, unmoving at 214, at the epicenter where the road seemed to hold its own, breathless ritual. Was he waiting for something to cross? Was I seeing a warning or bearing witness to a rule I had broken even by trying to record it? The truth is, some bridges exist not to be crossed, but to remind us how much remains unconnected, unmapped. Maybe the watcher is just fear given form, a shadow cast by the immense weight of responsibility and the knowledge that even the strongest structure can only keep the unknown at bay for so long. If you ever find yourself crossing Overpass 14 late at night, don't stop to look for the watcher, and don't try to record his presence. Let him keep his vigil in the liminal places between darkness and dawn, past and future, where the world is silent but still remembers. This is Verified Fears. Some stories, like bridges, aren't meant for closure, but for crossing alone in uneasy company. If you have seen the watcher, or simply felt that chill at the center of an empty road, add your story below. The highway is always listening, even from the places where silence stands watch.